Hi, it's Michael Kerr here, presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, I interview a fellow small business owner or an expert, and they share their stories, their lived experiences, the wins and the losses, and their best advice to help you, the listener, get the most you can from your own business. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. And thanks also to Kerr Capital, supporters of the show. Welcome into another edition of Small Business Banter Community Radio and Podcast. Darren Bourke is back with me today. Darren is a small and medium business coach. He was on about 4 weeks ago, Darren, I think.
Yeah,
something like that.
Quite recently, Michael.
And we had a ripping conversation about the shift in power between employers and employees. And we spoke at length about that, how it's changed in the last 3-4 years. So what we hinted at in that conversation was given this shift in power and how are employees going about incenting staff now that there has this shift has occurred. So welcome in again, firstly, Darren. It's great to have you back.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
And for those, if you just happen to be tuning into this one and you didn't catch Darren in our last discussion about a month ago, you can check it out on the Small Business Banter podcast, which you can find on Google, Spotify, etc., Apple. Darren, so let's rip into it today, because where we got to was it's been incredibly challenging for employers, and you were spending a big part of your time with your clients chatting about HR issues. And so it led on to us thinking about further discussion on how do you use incentives, what kinds of incentives you can use with employees. And if we have time, we want to talk about both of those relative to a sale of a business, which is, we'll come back to that if we have time. So over to you, Darren, if you just want to kind of kick us off with a bit of background on, are incentives still powerful, relevant? What kinds of incentives are you using and recommending with your clients?
Absolutely, Michael. So where we got to last time was, I guess, the whole piece around the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of looking to engage, empower, motivate, and most importantly, retain our existing labour, but also to attract new talent into our businesses when it's never been more competitive. And so I guess the launching pad for that was talking about those areas. And I guess on the quantitative side, I was suggesting that we need to at least make sure we're paying at or above market salaries. But where you and I got to that conversation where these, what I call at-risk opportunities to incentivise come about, is that it's very important, and SME owners, I'm sure, will appreciate this. If we continue to increase our base salary package in these inflationary times when we've got these, currently 7 to 8% inflation rates, it becomes very problematic, because there is a point where I keep on adding to Michael's base salary each year. And within 3 to 5 years, Michael's base has just run away. And so as my ongoing, input costs of running my business around employee wages and rent goes up, it becomes harder and harder to keep pace with Michael's wage growth. So the reason why these incentives, what I call at-risk incentives, is the whole angle of them, Michael, is to create a win-win scenario whereby if the business wins by achieving our targets and our objectives, well, there's more profit to share with our employee team members. And of course, in years in certain industries with seasonality and various other economic or market factors where we may not have a breakout year, well, you get paid to do your job. So that's why we pay the base salary package. So that's just an important part of the psychology of shifting gears in being just a one-trick pony with wages, considering these other elements. So I think it's important to get the baseline framework of what we're talking about first.
Yeah, and does that necessitate then call it cultural, call it whatever you want, that employees do need to understand how it's a vexed discussion as well, because they understand how powerful they are. They demand more. But, I mean, every day you come in as an employee, you can and do impact the viability of the business. So if you come with your A game, you help the business. But also if you don't come with your A game, the business suffers, and so there's less profit to share as in for incentives. So having that cultural or that one-on-one discussion with your key employees must be vital.
No, it is, Michael, and that's, I guess, the first step on the journey beyond the baseline of wages. So, interestingly, over the 25, 30 odd years, I've always found it quite interesting that and I don't know whether it's a particularly an Australian phenomenon or not, but some of the pushback and the objections, both from employers and employees, is often around, what will people think? And, I'm scared to share my data or my information with them or whatever. And I always get a little bit bemused by that. And even some of the questions that employees ask when we do have a bit of a town hall meeting around it, often they ask the wrong questions. So my starting point is, let's not default to worrying about the most challenging employee or a particular problem team. We're actually doing this for our brightest and our best and our loyal, ongoing team members. So the first thing is the mindset has to be, this isn't all things to all people. It's a model. And because of these objections and these fears, and the fears are very deep set with some people, particularly the owners. And I always, there is actually a hierarchy of how I introduce these, Michael. So the first one I trial is simply bonuses, okay? And the bonus area, I use the word trial because sometimes it doesn't work in that it doesn't either get it isn't engaging or attractive to employees for whatever reason, or it just doesn't work in moving the needle in, stepping up our productivity and our performance. So the word trial, which clients love, means that we've got to get out of jail card free, right? So if it doesn't work, we say, we're just going to try it for fin year 24. So the next financial year, we're going to try this for Michael. And so within those bonuses, I start off, I should say there is a two types of bonuses. There's a discretionary bonus, which is the more typical, Michael's done a great job this year, here's an amount of money. I'm not a particular fan of that because it often, I always say people talk and employees go out for Friday night drinks and I say, how was that, Michael? I couldn't believe when the boss gave me 5,000 and you say, what? 5,000, I got 2.5, so that can create other problems. So, and also it sets an expectation that might be forever and always, which I'm always reluctant to set these precedents. The second type of bonus that I much prefer using is what I call target bonuses. And so I split the bonuses over the trial period into three categories. The first category is if we hit our threshold target, which is effectively our baseline target of sales or revenue or GP or profit, then there's a certain percentage or dollar amount that I share at that baseline target. The second one is normally what I call a stretch target. So that might be a dollar amount or a percentage above that baseline target. And the third one is basically what I call the kicker, which is the above that stretch target. And this allows us flexibility and it allows us to reward based on where we hit that number over those three thresholds. And I've found that works really well. And then, of course, we've got all of the benefit of hindsight after the trial period. And then we sit down in the June quarter of the following year towards the end of the trial. And we normally distribute this in late July at the end of the financial year when the data's in. And so our game plan and our strategic plan and our budgets are all tied in together across the whole organisation with these bonuses. So that's the first place we start.
Yeah. In that, a couple of things that were notable. you wait till the end of the period before you measure whether the team, the staff have hit the target. Is that typically
yeah. Good question. Typically, I've found that the most, because we're talking about frequency, right? So when I've got very fundamental blue collar labour, I've found that a shorter period is better, being a month or a quarter, because the recency of the performance needs to be tied in the mindset of that operational worker in the front line. Where I have more, management, mid to upper level management, or more seasoned workers, or particularly white collar workers, or more middle management across the board, we find that quarterly, 6 monthly, or annual is the best. But annually can be problematic because it's a long time between that recognition.
Yeah, it sure is, and you need, things happen, and it's not. I'm assuming that you have some capacity to perhaps even vary the way you measure things during the period if something extraordinary happens. So, but you don't leave it right in disappoint or completely surprise.
The idea is to report the news on a regular basis and to share the intel in conjunction with some monetary reward. So that bonus is normally what I use as what I'd call the entree into moving forward with these incentive schemes. Now, if that's successful, Michael, we can then dare to dream about the next incentive scheme on the basis of that, which would be the second one I use, which is profit share. And this is where owners bravely, I recommend they consider sharing between 5% and as much as 20% of operational profit with either individuals, teams, or all staff, or a shandy of all three.
And you hinted at it early in our chat about the fear of open book management. I think it's in the US where it's like everything can be on the table in some businesses, and the theory is that everybody's aware, and if you've got the right staff, they'll all pull together when they need to. But this gets closer to that in terms of how the staff saying, "Well, how do we calculate profit?"
Yes, yes. You need to normalise that for extraordinary. Should there be any extraordinary expenses that are put through the books in relation to the directors, and so employees have an incredible radar. Whereby they can tell if they're being gamed, and as soon as they think that, whether the perception's true or it's just a figment of their imagination, the jig's up. And so from that point on, you lose that connectivity. And the whole point we're trying to do is to have a win-win. We're all on this bus together, and as soon as you start having people doubting whether we're on the same bus or in fact we're driving to the same destination, that's when it falls away. So look, I've had clients where they have been sensitive around profit, and I respect that, right? It depends on if you've just got like your senior long-term management team, often they'll be open to profit, but sometimes we might just do it on sales, which is a fairly vanilla number to share, or even gross profit margin, because at the end of the day, if we get our gross profit margin of 33%, say, on our sales revenue, then generally speaking, you're not sharing your profit. So they still don't know what your operating overhead is.
Yeah. And look, it can be commercially sensitive in some businesses, as in, like, forget about staff. We don't want this leaking out for whatever reason. And on today's edition of Small Business Banter, we're chatting again for the second time in a month, Darren Bourke, Business Coach. So Darren, we were chatting just before we started this about some case studies or examples of businesses where you've implemented some of these things. And I look at businesses day in, day out. The biggest cost in most businesses is staff. So if you can get more engagement, better performance, productivity, satisfaction, you're going to be a long way ahead. So, and we've covered those different types of incentives. Are they becoming more more of a baseline requirement now to have those whatever incentive package in place, or is it we're just throwing around different ways of rewarding people? What's different?
Yeah, look, I think certainly there's more of an appetite for in a labour short market that we find ourselves in, and with people getting above market increases and the employee feeling as if they have much more. They have much more sort of calibre of respect and attraction in the market. So we have to shape things up. Now, we've gone through the last time we spoke about the qualitative side of it, working from home and how to engage and empower on the non-financial side. This is only as good as our ability to complement those terms and conditions that we talked about last time with some monetary incentives that will hopefully basically what I'm trying to do is to lock in these team members with us so that they don't start that thought bubble around going to a competitor or moving for money or other reasons. It just kind of helps to take it off the table while being able to maintain our base salaries at budget so they don't race away from us. And also too, and this is something that plays to your area of expertise, the third of those after profit share is obviously, some sort of minority equity or even a path to equity through succession. And so SME owners, as you know better than any of us, Michael, find it very difficult sometimes in their industries to find that white knight to come in and buy them as a Mr. X, third party. And the thought of being able to sell a portion of the business to existing employees or family members, or a management buyout, it becomes more relevant to them with so many baby boomers trying to exit their business at the same time.
Yeah, it sure does. And it's, as a progression through those different types of incentives, that's where we get truly, an employee becomes a shareholder in some of those cases. So they're one and the same. And it's, but the pathway, is for the founding owner to think about both performance of the business while they own it, but also how can staff be a part of their individual exit, which is never easy. And so even if the staff don't become shareholders, they're vital in the transition of a lot of businesses from one owner to the next. So you still need to look after them and incent them, through a sale process. So, but yeah, you're right with those the employee share plans, and it's when you start to have to release all of that information about the business in its minutiae, because someone's going to need to understand what they're buying into, what's the profit, not just as a participating employee, but as a part owner.
Absolutely. And I mean, I that third tier, let's call it, is kind of, you're getting into your brown belt, black belt territory, where the bonuses and the profit share give you all of the benefits of incentivization, but without it's completely flexible. It can be year on year. You can run trials. People can come and go and depart the organisation. Of course, when we consider an equity model, we've got all of the those aspects you just touched on there. What happens when they leave their job? How do we value their shares should they leave? The cost of having shareholders agreements, having minority shareholders, voting rights, dispute resolution. Yes. So this isn't. That's not to say they don't work, but I believe that trialling these earlier ones I introduced is a much better way into it, because you get to assess the lay of the land with your cohort. And if you get any amber or red flags around those participants potentially being problematic if we stepped it up to equity, well, that's your due diligence. So you actually get through those earlier schemes a real line of vision on whether there's a natural sort of continuum towards something like equity or management buyout. So it actually adds a due diligence aspect to the journey as well, long in advance of needing it.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. It's an interesting way to look at it, that because being a shareholder or a part owner is not for everybody, and it's extremely there's so much more to it than just being a really effective employee.
Yes.
it can be a whole set of challenges around governance and risk. Maybe you have to borrow to get in. So it's but you're right. Then it might. I suspect that over the next 10, 15 years, a lot of the businesses that are planning on selling are going to actively need to consider, firstly, two types of buyers. One is direct competitors, which is always really tricky.
Yes.
Reaching out to or taking a call from a competitor. The other group will be employees, and they so that what you've described there, if the owner's tuned in and phases in and trials incentives, you can have a pretty good look at who's got the ability to be a very good employee, but also potentially, if not the owner, a part owner. And I like the way you've framed that.
And you mentioned, Michael, were there any examples of, because people like to hear real case studies. A couple of quick ones that come to mind. I've got one client that does two of his key people on a 7.5% profit share. So they get an interim amount for the first 6 months of 7.5% each. And then once the accountant finishes the year-end tax returns, there's a final dividend. So it's 15% of the taxable income of the year. And that works well. I did another one with a client whereby we did a stepping stone equity model where both of the the general manager or commercial manager in the back office, we got him up to 10% over a 5-year period. And the frontline manager out on the sites, he got 10% as well. And we basically did a very simple model where they got bonuses and they rolled their bonuses over a 5-year period at 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. And then we gifted them the last 2% in year 5 to take them up to 10% each. And then we actually took their salaries up to a capped total remuneration package and then just basically said that it was CPI increases after that. So we have no further wage discussions ever again.
Right.
And then the final one we're looking at currently is whereby there might be children in the business that can't necessarily fund the purchase prior to the estate being wound up upon the parents passing, which we don't want to think about at this early stage. But what we've been able to do is come up with a more of a long-term 8 to 10 year model where we can transfer equity in a lockstep way over a longer period with a trusted family member, which gives the children an opportunity to get equity over a period of time, but the owners also, or the parents, to still get the lion's share of the profits over that period too. So again, win-win, if that makes sense.
No, it does. They're both, interesting ways because there is a very strong element of phasing things in, which in another way is saying you don't leave everything until the end, or you don't do things in an unplanned way. And but the advantage also is that culturally, emotionally, whoever's coming in and whoever's going out, does it over a period of time and gets used to this idea of sharing and linking performance to payment of some kind of incentive.
And to flip it back just a quick sub-point to that, we've been largely talking about the employees or the incoming. To come back to the group that you often deal with being the exiting owners, well, the owners also have a lot of legacy issues and a lot of psychology and major long-term hang-ups that we've got to unravel within them, and each one of them is unique, but around how the hell do I get out? So once they know that they've got a runway, often having that 5 to 8 to 10 year lead time, I find that's very cathartic for them to allow them an adequate period of time to get their head around it as well, because there's a lot of emotion and psychology in their exit for them individually. And now I'm talking about at a more humanistic level, Michael.
Yeah, which is in small business is critically important, and it's
absolutely
it's the same for the owner as it is for employees. We all go to work and we all want to be relevant and happy and get rewarded. So no, I think it's it is it's often left unspoken or undiscussed, and it's to the detriment of everybody, because I haven't met too many owners that have been in business for 20, 30 years that talk about wanting to get out tomorrow, and some genuinely do, some genuinely need to, but a lot of people, they've been successful because they've been wired in a particular way, and it's not great just to kind of terminate that all of a sudden. So all this stuff we've talked about of transitioning out over a longer period of time is incredibly productive. And also, it sounds like the way you work with your clients, you talked about 3 case studies, and they're all quite different.
Yes.
But they're all quite tailored, I'm guessing, to the culture or that particular environment, that particular owner and set of employees. So,
absolutely.
Darren, look, a really terrific discussion. Don't have long, but do you want to just shout out your website if people wanted to make contact with you?
Yeah, please. LinkedIn, as we said last time, is a great spot. But my website is Darren K. Bourke, BOURKE.com. I've got an ebook on the site. I've got obviously my book, The Fourth Moon, and they can obviously reach out to me via email. Excellent.
Hey, Darren, another really practical discussion. Thanks for taking time and for sharing all of that with us. I know that people will get an awful lot to think about and hopefully action out of that. Thanks very much.
And thanks for the opportunity again, Michael. It's been my pleasure.
Good-o. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Michael.
So that is all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. I continue to be inspired, bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. If you want to listen to any past episode, jump onto your podcast platform of choice and search Small Business Banter. There you will find a diverse and fascinating collection of small business owners and experts openly discussing and sharing their experiences. For any of the links, resources, or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact me, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And it would be great to have you tune in the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.